Welcome to this episode of Men Who Understood the Times. I'm Michael with Andy and Josh. And then our disclaimer that we begin with is, we're not speaking for our churches or our school or our church body. We're just three guys early on a Saturday morning with coffee or smoothies and so forth, uh, just talking about things, uh, putting, applying scripture to them, and then uh, again, a review of our title, Men Who Understood the Times. That's from Second Chronicles 12, verse 32. And the title is both scriptural and tongue-in-cheek in that we're not saying we understand the times as men, but rather we're using scripture to understand the times. And that's the key. And we touch on some uh, touchy subjects at times, and others like today. I don't think it's going to be that controversial because we're going to be talking about homeschooling. And but one of the things of why we're talking about this is homeschooling has exploded. It has become more popular, so it is something to deal with because it's in our culture. Uh, so we're going to look at why is homeschooling an option. The first thing we want to talk about is curriculum and socialization. So Andy, you homeschool, but when I because Josh pointed out last episode how I'm so much older than you guys. So back when
Speak the
our
truth in
kids,
love.
yes, speak the truth in love. Back when my girls were little, and I have four of them, but when I was a pastor in Radcliffe, Kentucky, in Hardin County, we had our oldest daughter, Abby, in school. And at that time, Kentucky was one of the lowest of the 50 states in education. Hardin County was one of the lowest of the counties of a very low education state of Kentucky. So we ended up pulling Abby out of the school, and then Shelley primarily was the main teacher. And so we do have a little bit of experience in homeschooling, and she loved it. One of the reasons I took the call from Kentucky to Wisconsin was to have a Lutheran education, and we loved that. It was a blessing to have Wisconsin Lutheran School and Shoreland Lutheran High School for the Christian education of our children. But she and I both missed having that homeschool, uh, being there with our girls and raising them at home in the education too. So go ahead, Andy, and talk about maybe curriculum and then socialization as well.
Okay, I will just begin with a couple of things. I'll talk about public school curriculum just briefly, and that is on a personal level because in Vegas we are not against. Excuse me, in Vegas we are in the midst of a just a terrible lowest ranking type of public school setting chronically every year. And so if people will always say that the two worst things about living in Vegas are the educational system and the healthcare system. And it takes people a while to figure that out. On the healthcare side, the axiom is it's very easy to die in Vegas. On the educational system, I would argue that in Vegas, at least, or maybe in particular, it's very easy to lose your kids in the educational system here. So we sent our daughter to Green Valley Evangelical Lutheran preschool and kindergarten, and it was outstanding. Then we sent her to first grade kindergarten again at Coral Academy, only because she has an exceedingly late birthday. She's an incredibly bright kid. She didn't need to be held back. But we decided because of her age, and she's, my wife and I are both skin and bones kind of skinny. So our daughter's pretty diminutive as well. So just physically to get another year of physical maturity, we decided to do that too. Well, Coral Academy in Las Vegas, we found out is owned by actually the whole system of Coral Academies is owned by a Turkish Muslim in the opposite party as Erdogan was in Turkey. So we didn't necessarily see that affecting the curriculum a whole lot. However, we were concerned that it might. Moreover, it was a 30-minute drive one way, not including if there was terrible traffic. Okay, so then we got her into a charter school, a different charter school called Legacy Traditional Schools, which was at least I thought out of Arizona and had the reputation of being a much more traditional curriculum approach, like reading, math, science. That was what they were going to focus on. Well, by that time, my daughter was in second grade. My son was in kindergarten going there. And we couldn't afford to, with multiple kids, we couldn't afford to go two different directions or to send my kid to Green Valley to pay for that again. So we sent them to legacy traditional schools. And one day, my son was sitting in the back seat and singing, let's put it this way, not the traditional national anthem. So, okay, that tells me that maybe the music teachers got a little bit of a political bias, but whatever, not a big deal. Then he graduates kindergarten. My daughter graduates second grade. We take them back for my wife and I have been talking about homeschooling just because there were some other administrative curriculum changes that they were making even in that school. Like for example, they were going to teach upper level math. They decided not to do that. Okay, so long story short, we showed up for registration for my son's first grade year, and there were only two options for teachers, for first grade teachers. One was his kindergarten teacher who was moving up to first grade, and he was excited about that possibility, of course. And the other table, which is the one that ended up having his name on it, was a woman that was dressed in a full head, shoulder to ankle sundress that was a rainbow, had rainbow earrings, had orange spiked hair, and had custom ordered rainbow Chuck Taylors. And so, kind of with a consternated look, my wife and I looked at each other and I said, guess we're homeschooling. And we just walked away. So that said, that took some time and effort for us to prepare. We had to make sure we had to follow up on research we had already begun. My wife did the lion's share of this. There are a handful of good homeschool curriculums out there. Each one has its strengths and weaknesses, so you have to kind of be uh, flexible. And we do know a number of other homeschool parents who will cherry pick, pick and choose to combine curriculums to get what the way that they want or the curriculum class that they want. We use mostly Abeka, but we use Christlight for our Bible instruction, and we even do a little bit more for Bible instruction too than just that. They probably spend about 45 minutes to an hour on the scriptures each day. And part of our thinking with that was we recognize they're not going to have a classroom full of students, and that is a drawback for sure. But we don't consider that to be the primary factor in our kids' education is the social element. It's a good factor. It's a helpful factor, even educationally, academically, it's a good factor, but it's not primary. The primary thing is, so long as we have our kids under our roof, we want to guard the good deposit for them, and we want to facilitate the Lord watching their heart, for it is the wellspring of life. And so if we can establish a great spiritual foundation, we can have, my wife and I, at least clear consciences, deploying them into the world, setting them free into the world to go live out their Christian vocations if we've given them a solid foundation as part of the curriculum that we determine.
So before we go to you, Josh, so what I'm hearing, Andy, is, and I think parents understand this, is there is a pull to homeschool to go away from something bad because in the public schools we have to understand. You mentioned this with the kind of teachers. The teachers are going to be woke. I tell this to our people all the time because they get all riled up about who's the president and vice president, governor, mayor. So those things really don't matter because what really matters is who are your kids' teachers? Who are your school librarians? It's from the ground up, those educators. And so you might be pulling your kids out of the school because I think we've fallen into this trap to believe that there are things that are neutral. Our public schools are not neutral. Okay, if they are not Christ centered, then they're going to be on the team of the other guy, of Satan. And so they're going to be indoctrinating students with propaganda. Uh, and so so the other thing is, it's not just going away from something, but it's coming to something. And that's what we were talking about too, is that you get to raise your children uh, in your curriculum with Christianity. That was one of the things that we really loved. Well, some of my favorite lessons I still remember all these years later was doing archaeology. I took the girls out in the backyard. I had taken their sandbox and I hid some dinosaurs and some bones and things like that in the sandbox, and we dug them all up and we brushed them off, and then we did a study on ar archaeology. We could do as far as curriculum, we could learn about animals by going to the zoo, going to the aquarium. We could learn history lessons. You guys have heard me say this before uh, that I don't think we study enough about history. It's all social studies. And so you could go to a museum and study history. You can do, and this is leading into Josh's skills, that you can teach kids the things they're not learning in school. Those life skills like cooking and cleaning. You can teach them how to use tools, how to fix a vehicle, budgeting. Uh, all those things that are not taught in schools these days that used to be taught. And one last thing too is because I heard this when from our own family members when we talked about homeschooling, they said, "Well, what about socializing?" And uh, if your kids are in the social in a public school setting, there's a lot of kids there you don't want them socializing with. Okay, and so the beautiful thing is we'll talk about this later on, is you can do co-ops. You get involved. You can go to the library, go to the zoo. The kids meet other kids. That's just what they do. But also, the best thing is they learn to socialize with their siblings. And like my girls, they are super close, and uh, and they learn to socialize with adults too. And you see a lot of kids today, they don't know how to talk to adults. They're always in their phone. Okay. But when you homeschool, one of the blessings is they're with their parents, they're with other adults in small group settings, and so they know how to talk to adults, and so they can socialize that way. So go ahead, Josh, and you can talk about the same thing on curriculum and socializing.
Sure. So I think my theme for today is going to be that you are in charge of your child's catechesis. You are in charge of raising your children, and it's important to recognize that first of all, not everybody has access to Lutheran education. Not every church has a school attached to it. Does yours, Andy, have a school? No, if you're homeschooling, of course it doesn't.
We have a preschool. We had a preschool and kindergarten, but then when
Yeah.
our kindergarten teacher retired, we just didn't keep it running.
Or I know several people who just said, no, this is just a life goal. I want to, like, I feel called to teach my own kids. And so we want to homeschool. Uh, our children, we have three children, they do attend the school that is part of our church. And um, as far as the socialization issue is concerned, I think it's a valid concern, but I think it's an overblown concern. Um, we have several students at the high school level that I've interacted with over the years, and homeschool kids are almost always, not 100% because there's outliers, obviously. Um, they are incredibly wise, first of all. They're calm, they're observers. Um, they are not exhibiting what I would call a deficit of social skills. Quite the opposite. They're very good at interacting with adults. Frankly, I think a little bit better than students who went to either a public school or LES school. And one of the reasons for that is socialization then becomes intentional at the homeschool level. An example of this, we have a rock climbing club in Milwaukee. We have Adventure Rock, which is a incredibly well done indoor rock climbing gym. All right. And you can have like, I mean, 200 people inside this massive gym. And then people have harnesses on and there's ropes and there's climbing. And we have a homeschool group that comes and like their 4-year-old is interacting with teenagers. And um, she's an incredible climber too. She weighs like 35 pounds and is just, incredibly proficient. And so I don't think that the socialization thing is an issue. I also think about, especially in the public schools, the prevalence of technology and cell phones that you can't control. Um, in our house, currently the precedent is we managed to put off cell phones until Christmas of your freshman year of high school. And so, and I wish I should have pushed for sophomore year. Um, just because the technology is so addictive. And if you look at the statistics for students' exposure to pornography, one of the reasons for that is not that it's happening at home, but that some kid has a cell phone, like a fully unlocked iPhone that can get online and go anywhere, on the bus or in their backpack and in aftercare or whatever else. And so as far as socialization is concerned, that's not an issue, I would think, for homeschooling.
So can I jump in there, Mike? Because
Yeah.
Josh hit on a couple of cool things. The thing about Marxism is that they tell you that you're all latently socialized and that you just need to be awakened to it. So I want everybody to know, especially since I invoke that ism all the time, that we're not talking about Marxist socialization per se. However, that is an agenda within the public school system. And I want to make very clear that um, we look at people as individuals, as pastors and teachers in our ministerium, don't we? Not every public school teacher has this wicked initiative. I've got a few in my congregation, and they're rock solid people. In fact, I have a gentleman in my congregation who's relatively new to the WELS. He's the principal of a public school, elementary school nearby our church, and he's a principal of the school. He has 5 children, and his wife homeschools. So they willfully chose to do the same. And what I want to say as it connects to socialization is that every kid is different too. But I suppose my theory is, or my principle is, okay, let's say one kid who's homeschooled does just fine socializing, socially. They're able to figure it out. They're able to navigate friend circles with some measure of smoothness, and it's not a big deal. You wouldn't even be able to tell they're homeschooled. And what if you have another kid who's a little bit stunted socially? Not that he or she is uh, inept socially, but perhaps a little clumsy or wooden or awkward. Who cares? I'd much rather have that be a weakness than to have them be wokeified to their higher degree of political literacy thanks to their Marxist socialization in the public school system for 12, 16 years. So again, I default to that Solomonic wisdom. Guard your heart. It is the wellspring of life. God cares about the soul and the body, but the soul above all. He cares about your spirituality more than he cares about your academic prowess, though academic prowess is not a bad thing.
And so before we go on to the next point too is both of you guys mentioned this is as parents, these children belong to us. There are those who have come out to say, well, the children belong to all of us. President Biden had said that during his presidency. Well, these are all our children. No, these are our children. God has given these children to us. And so we are responsible for them. And so whether you choose public school or a Lutheran elementary school, a Christian school, a charter school, homeschool, you are as parents in charge of your children. They are yours to take care of. Uh, with the curriculum too, I just read this yesterday in the Cowboy State Daily here for Wyoming. Is they're fighting about this in the Supreme Court about uh, $7,000 for each student to be used for a school choice. Okay, and you know I guess the government doesn't feel like they should be paying the $7,000 for a child to not be in a public run or government run school. And I'm in the mindset, and it was a blessing to have school choice in Racine. It's a blessing for you, Josh. So many of your students cannot afford to go to Wisco
Oh,
school choice.
my children are choice as well.
Yeah. And I think it's a blessing. And I bring it up here because I think a portion of that could go to homeschoolers, to help fund these kinds of things with curriculum. And then because it's been so long since Shelley and I did homeschooling, I asked a couple of friends, lay people and called workers about what they do for homeschooling. When it comes to curriculum, they wrote, there is no best curriculum, teaching style, learning location, or school calendar. The thing that works best for the neighbor may not be a fit for you. The thing that was perfect for the firstborn may not work with the nextborn. Some kids learn best at 8 a.m. and some at 3 p.m., and that's okay. So my neighbors homeschooled when I was in Mount Pleasant. They still homeschool. And, the beautiful thing is, like by noon, they're done. Okay. They did all their stuff. And these are kids too. And when we look at some of the other points, these are kids that are reading full novels and they're little kids. Uh, Also, it's okay not to finish a curriculum, to change mid-year or to take a day off just because there's no behind or ahead, just meeting your kid right where they are. And sometimes the best days of learning are days the books never even come out. And so there, where you take off for 3 months in LES, Lutheran Elementary School, public school, and then the kids forget so much, you can keep going with homeschooling. You have to give them summer off. You can lighten the load and so forth, but you can still be teaching them. And one parent said it can be challenging to have your own child, but it helps you to get to know them better. So, Andy, if you want to talk about the philosophy of homeschooling, why would parents even consider doing this thing?
Well, because not every parent has the ability, like Josh, of being an Alex Honnold and aspiring to climb the face of El Capitan, or of being like you, Mike, and mastering the Cowboy State Daily. That is so vintage. I can't even believe you live in a state whose lead paper is the Cowboy State Daily.
That's
Very, very
fantastic.
impressive. Okay, so a couple of things to riff on here. The the concept of homeschooling you touched on well, uh, does allow you to control your kids' educational content. I don't know when we're talking about the efficiency of time a little bit in this whole mix, whether it's always going to be this ideal where you're done by noon, because especially if you have multiple kids under your roof, and if you're homeschooling them all, and if the woman takes or if the wife takes the primary role in the homeschooling, I provide spiritual oversight of the curriculum and I provide spiritual substance for their Bible discussions. And then, of course, I catechize my kids when they get to that age level. And we have, a family altar, so to speak. But my wife is on the ground the most with these kids. So, so it's just not realistic to assume with orthodontist appointments and dentist appointments and doctor's appointments or sports practices or things going on at church that you're always going to have everything done clean and tidy by like noon or 3 o'clock or 5 o'clock like you might at a normal school. But what you are going to get is you're going to get much more individualized attention. To your point about each kid being different, my oldest daughter is incredibly independent and self-sufficient, well-read, and sort of like a brainiac. My son is not as naturally intuitive or academically smart. However, he is a fiercely hard worker. It'll be 8 a.m. and I'll be like, "How you doing, buddy?" He's like, "Well, I'm halfway done with the school day already." Because the minute he gets up, he's already attacking it. And so he's smart in process and use of his time. Each kid is very, very different, but they're both incredibly faithful in using the gifts that God has given them. And you can really hone in on that better as a homeschool parent because you don't have 20 kids or 30 kids or even 40 kids in Vegas in your classroom. That's another thing I do want to say. I'm not suggesting that homeschool is the only option or the best, best for everybody. Every family situation is going to be different. We're able to homeschool here. My congregation takes incredibly good care of me, of us, as their pastor and the pastor's family. But and we do have some public schools around here who I think, you know, concertedly do a decent job and are not like off the deep end woke. In fact, I'm thinking of one high school down the street from us whose principal I know very, very well. And that gentleman leads a very, very good ship and has, a good angle on these things. But that curriculum has still been tainted a little bit. And then again, circling back to socialization, in a setting like mine, which might be different from others, your church becomes your family. Your mission church especially becomes your family. Beautiful Savior is not a mission church anymore, but it's a mission setting. And we're a congregation of about 275 souls. We worship about 130 to 140 between two services. We have a stable but not huge programmatic ministry. So there are opportunities for the kids and the adults and all different ages to interact and do various things, both spiritually intoned and primarily fellowship intoned as well. So it's just um, it's kind of like to each his own in a way that way. You get to sort of forge your own path. But the reason you do it is to provide this well-rounded sort of opportunity for your kid, perhaps even to a degree that couldn't be enjoyed uh, through traditional means or avenues.
Yeah. Yeah. And then with that too, to understand when you are able to homeschool, everything's taught from a Christian worldview. Again, you're not going to get that in a public school because, like I said earlier, a public school is not coming from a neutral position. There's no neutrality in the world. People are either on God's side or on Satan's side. And so it's a spiritual battle. And so are we willing to hand our children over uh, for 8 hours a day to some institutions and some teachers that hate Christ and his followers? One of the people I asked about this wrote, uh, every other system is inherently anti-human because the system tries to optimize itself for results and along the way prioritizes results and detachment, personal development, and character. At a school today, a teacher cannot hug a child or share any personal information. This vacuum of personal character development leads to a system that depersonalizes and dehumanizes, creating empty vessels to be filled with whatever the culture has to offer and whatever work they want to take on to fill their days while spending the rest of their lives always looking for meaning. Uh, so he says, I'm not sure how many of our schools even have a goal of development of Christian character. Uh, so, so the key is just to understand, again, homeschooling is going to be a Christian worldview, at least the way we're talking about it, as opposed to a public school that's going to be anti-human worldview, anti-God worldview. And, the beautiful thing about a Lutheran elementary school, a Lutheran high school, is then you have that those are Christ-centered schools, but not everyone has those options. So go ahead and talk about the philosophy of homeschooling, Josh.
I think if you properly view children as a blessing from God and also as far as purpose is concerned, one of the core purposes of life is raising your children. Like that's what God commands, be fruitful and multiply, and that's what you're for. Those are the best fulfillments of your vocations if you are a woman and a mother or a father, um, fulfilling raising your children, that is what you're designed to do in one aspect or another. And I was just reading some stats. You have 75% of the time you will ever spend with your child, like personally face to face, is by age 12. And I think that'll increase a little bit. I mean, how many more hours would you spend um, with your kids if you homeschooled versus 6 to 8 hours a day away from them? That's, or this was sobering. Um, I don't know if this is actual, but it hits, as the kids say. You get 19 years with your kids. The first 18 are when they're living with you at home. And then the 19th year is sort of sliced up over the next 40 or 50 years where you have 3 days spent together at a lake house, or they come by for Christmas, Easter dinner, whatever it is. And I mean, you think about that, and our time is precious and it's limited with our children. And um, I think about I did not look this quote up, it just came to me. Steve Jobs, when he was lying on his deathbed, his core regret was not spending more time with his kids, and he invented the iPhone, and changed humanity. None of that mattered at the end, right? If he said I would give it all up to go back and spend more time with my wife and kids when they were young. And so that's the why behind it, I think. And that's why I think some people, despite the fact that we have very good Christian Lutheran schools available, they still want to homeschool because you've got that purpose piece, and you've got the fact that you're spending so much more time with your kids. And what greater blessing could there be than more time with your kids?
Yeah. And, I like you guys and I like the members of our church, but my favorite people are my wife and my children. I really like hanging out with them. And that's the thing that you were saying, Josh, is to be able to hang out with them
Hmm.
all the time growing up in those fun years. Uh, and with that too is to think of the teacher to student ratio. It's just mind blowing. You know, even in our Lutheran elementary schools and so forth, you've got 20 to 25 kids. It's hard to have individual learning for those students. Whereas when you've got, uh, you know, a few kids, and one of the blessings of homeschooling, it seems that there's lots of kids. You just have large families, and then to be able to hang out with them. Another thing is, as one person I interviewed said, you get to read actual books. They said Pilgrim's Progress in third grade, Oliver Twist
Hmm.
in fifth grade. I would add in, put in Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia and read those all the time, along with obviously with the Bible. And you don't need for homeschooling, you don't need a lot of textbooks. You don't need a lot of money. It's a library card. When I was in Radcliffe, Kentucky, we had it was just such a tiny library. It was as big as the room I'm in now. It was very tiny, but I would go once a week for reading with the kids, and I was the only dad there. But it was cool. Now here in Casper, it's a little bit bigger library. It's actually a lot bigger than that. It's not like when we moved to Racine, we took our girls because they had seen the Radcliffe library, and we went to the Racine library, and it was like we were in Disney World because there were so many books. But here in Casper, Shelley and I are amazed for a city that has 58,000 people, the quality of our library here, because she and I have gone down there to do some projects with leather making, with the Glowforge and so forth. So they have a creative center where you can use the Glowforge, the Cricut 3D printers. You can check out sewing machines. They have things there you can
Cool.
do Lego, but also they've got all kinds of things where uh, they have reading programs for the littles, workshops for the teens, book discussions. You can sign up for these things. They have journaling and playwriting, and those are always filled up. So those are things that you can do your uh, to supplement the education you use for homeschooling. So, Josh, we start with you with this one is, can busy parents homeschool? I think that's going to be a question a lot of people who are considering homeschooling going, can I do this? What do you think?
I've seen it done. Um, in the notion of you are in charge of your child's catechesis. Andy, you said you're in charge of your kids' spiritual upbringing. And if I can share my screen, can I share? Yes, I can. Okay. So two things. Yes, you can. And to that end, um, this is the ELS version. It's got crumbs on it because this is our after dinner process. The ELS Luther Small Catechism, and we are on, let's see here, what are we on? Oh, the fifth chief part of the opposite keys in confession. There you go. And just having my children read through this and having my second grader read through this really helps to. I mean, we're doing reading out loud at home, and then we'll have discussions about this. Um, a curriculum that I mentioned a couple episodes ago that we just got was um, this, and I have not fully vetted the whole thing. Systematic theology for kids. And this this is a little Spartan if you're looking for a whole prepackaged everything. Okay, so like for example, the first lesson is here's week one. We're gonna read through uh the book of Genesis and then ask these questions. Three clues that God created everything. And what this is trying to do is to short circuit a child um, going to college and hearing what actually are in real life very good arguments against the whole existence of Christianity. And this is what systematic theology does is it short circuits those and it gives you those answers in the order of always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have. And so you've got uh, it's evidence. It's evidence, it's logic, it's reasoning. And you do have to know your Bible very well. And there's no answer key for any of this, as it were. And so, but this is a good framework so far. I've not found anything that's eyebrow raising in here. Um, and so this is another great option for at least homeschooling your kids. In my case, it's in addition to going to confirmation class or the Bible classes that they have. Um, and and it's certainly not any kind of a commentary that there's a deficit there, but now I know what they're getting and I can have discussions with my kids because as a father, that's my job.
Yeah. And with that too, I know it sounds like I'm very down on public schools. I ministered to public school teachers were members of mine, and they're the ones that have mentioned these kinds of things. So they they have become very frustrated in their schools. They are Christians, sometimes teaching anti-Christian things because it's about evolution. You have to accept someone's supposed gender and pronouns and things like that. And the big thing is when the students come to them as a teacher asking for help, they cannot lead them to repentance. They cannot lead them to the cross. They cannot lead them to Jesus Christ as the solution to their problems. Their solution is always going to be humanistic, which is not the proper solution. And so these are frustrations that are coming from our own public school teachers who are WELS members. So, Andy, if you want to talk about that too, of can busy parents homeschool?
Well, we do it, and instead of sounding like a martyr and taking you through my schedule this last week which was absolutely upside down and insane. I'll just tell you, absolutely can be done. It can be done though, particularly if you unburden yourself of the guilt of these deadlines and pressures that come with a curriculum. You know, if you don't finish a week perfectly, tidily, according to the book, it is not the end of the world. You want the kid to grasp the concept. You want them to get the practice of going through like Josh's foray or field of expertise would be science. If they can execute the experiment and they understand the point behind the experiment, then whether they check every box in the assignment thing is not necessarily essential. But if you're considering homeschool, you should realize that homeschooling, you should realize that in your first year, you're gonna burden yourself with that guilt. You just have to be ready for it, and then the flexibility, God willing, will grow over time. By the way, I want to speak to pastors out there too. Even if you're not a homeschooler, or even if you have a school, even that you might consider homeschool co-ops, or even the concept of microschooling if you don't have a school might be strategic and viable alternatives to ECMs in the future. The reason I bring that up is because here in Vegas, the public schools are subsidizing 4K pre-Ks now, and that has proven to be a threat to the viability of our preschool. We've been really struggling to get over 20 kids every year now for the last 3, 4 years. That stretches back into COVID a little bit. But we're meeting this morning as a leadership group to talk about strategic planning for the next year or two. And high on that agenda is going to be the viability of our preschool. And it's not for lack of trying. We've done social media, or we continue to do social media. We do tons of evangelism one-on-one with people. We take a lot of phone calls. We do a lot of follow-ups. We do a lot of door hangers. And it's hard to move the needle when you're competing with free. So perhaps in your area, a micro school or a homeschool co-op would be an alternative outreach method you could at least consider. Then we've talked about this. Homeschooling is not an option for everybody. So can a busy parent homeschool? Well, maybe, maybe not. Just don't be afraid to give it a shot. You have a lot of WELS allies, or a lot of allies within our church body who could guide you and help you and encourage you. But what I think we need to get away from, and I sense this is happening to some degree, but we need to get away from the guilt tripping and stigmatization that, like Ricky Gervais was stigmatized after the 2020 Golden Globes for going right after people. And sometimes homeschoolers, people still raise their eyebrows at homeschoolers too. Like, this is not something weird. This is something that is a concerted and deliberate decision by people who have a heart for the gospel, just like those who might consider the options and decide to send their kids to a public school or a Lutheran elementary school. As long as you are trying to wrestle with the scriptures, then make your decision, then there should not be any kind of stigmatization as though, one system is superior to another. And that on that last regard, my grandfather on my father's side was an incredibly brilliant man. He never graduated past the sixth or seventh grade. He was a farm kid. He ended up owning a dairy farm. He would do all sorts of complicated math equations because the dairy farm was huge on the post in the basement of his farm. And I remember distinctly being like a sophomore at MLC, and this doesn't say much about my intelligence, but my grandfather would sit across the table to me after he was a widower, and he would destroy me in Scrabble. He was just an incredibly well-read man, incredibly intelligent. The school system is a construct of sorts. The Lutherans came up with it as a great idea, and it is a great idea, but the public school system is basically a co-opting of what was a Christian Lutheran idea, and it has, of course, we know, been tainted to a great degree and to a great extent by current circumstances and critical theories. Well, you have to be vigilant as a parent, whatever your choice is going to be. And just because we homeschool our kids doesn't guarantee the outcome of their eternity. But what it allows us is all the blessings and benefits that have been previously discussed.
Yeah, and with that, one of the reasons why homeschooling has kind of exploded the last few years is you mentioned COVID, is because the students were at home and they were on their computers with Zoom classes and so forth, that parents got to see what was being taught in their schools, and they had no idea before this. And so that's when you notice the last 5 years, homeschooling has doubled, tripled, quadrupled, and so forth. And with it, you mentioned this, Andy, and everyone I talked to about homeschooling said the same thing. You do have the time to do this because you don't have to do it alone. They said find a community, find co-op, find neighbors, find friends that do these kinds of things, because someone has been right where you are struggling with these same things, trying to figure it out. And so a co-op is a great way to socialize the students at the same time. And so, Shelly, she loves math. She's kind of weird that way. I gave up math in high school. I was going on the pastor track, and so you don't need a whole lot of math to be a pastor. And but if Shelly wasn't good at math and I'm not good at math, well, I would make sure that we had someone in our co-op that could teach the math, or someone like if he was homeschooling his kids and we were there, he could be the science teacher. Okay, and so you do those kinds of things, and then we would be in charge of the theology curriculum for ourselves. Because when we were in Kentucky, well, there are no Lutherans in Kentucky, very few, except for who we had in our church. And so, I wasn't going to ask them to do the theology, but they were all Christians. And so that's the key too. And so, I mean, Josh, if you want to talk about the efficiency of time, we've kind of touched on this because I think of this too. I am very schedule oriented. I've become less this way. I would make sure, like teaching catechism class in seventh and eighth grades, I'm going to get through this lesson in these 50 minutes I have. We're going to plow through it, and then so that we start fresh the next time. As I've gotten older, I've gotten to the point of, okay, it's okay if whether it's a Bible study or something else, if we go over the time or we need to continue the next week, that's okay too. I'd rather them learn the material than just be a slave to the schedule. And so if you want to talk about that, the schedule of like any kind of school, a Lutheran elementary school, Lutheran high school, public school versus the kind of time you can have homeschooling.
Well, I think, you mentioned finishing by noon, and that's a great component there. Um, I have classes of 26 right now, okay, in a lab environment, and I am teaching content that is known for being classically boring, and so I have a tall order. Now, um, I found ways to make that fun and interesting by intersplicing personal anecdotes or stories or having demonstrations that are set up. I think, you know, I love teaching because I think wonder is one of the purest forms of joy. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but as I've grown older, I'm 45, wonder gets hard, man, you're over a certain age. Um, but the kids experience wonder. And if you're in a chemistry lab, like you can do wonder a lot actually, because there's so many cool things to look at and see. Um, but but I would say this, I'm constantly watching the audience that I have in front of me. And as I'm teaching, and I've been teaching for 23 years, I am constantly reading my kids for the cues that I look for that they're actually engaged with what I'm saying. Okay. When you have 26 kids, it's incredibly difficult to keep that number at 100%. They begin to drift, and they drift for two reasons. Either you've gone past where their ability level is, okay, or um, you're underneath it and they're bored and they're disconnected and they've already gotten where you're going in 3 minutes, and now they're just like, okay, I've got to wait for the rest of the class to catch up. And so when you have that many kids, you're going to have this lag and pull shift, if you will, okay? And one of the things that you really want to go for, this concept was very popular in the like 2010s, is differentiation, differentiated instruction, differentiated assessment, where like you're catering the lesson for each kid in some way. All right. When you have 26 kids, that's impossible to do. You cannot do it. You can do it like in compartments, right? But in any given class, I know which kids are going to get it the first time I explain something. Okay. And if we're talking about like titrations or buffer equations, you're talking about mathematics that's extremely complex with between 200 and 300 steps. I have kids where I explain it once and they get it. And I have other kids who, just because of how their mind works, they need to see it done several times and then see the variations on that math and walk through it. And so it becomes very difficult. In a homeschool environment, differentiation is all you do. You are you are catering to the individual child. And so in that way, it's much more effective. And so you can manage your time very, very well because you don't have a block of time allotted where, okay, right now we're doing English for these, I don't know, 42 minutes or whatever it ends up being. And if you finish early, we're still in English class. Okay. Whereas if you hit your marks, you go on to the next thing. And also you can have, oh, my sister-in-law homeschools their 4 children, and they are not behind. They are ahead of where their peers are in the public schools for certain. Um, and then also I would say this, I have 130 students consistently, if I take the top 10 students that I have, half those kids are homeschool kids. And so this can be done. It can be done very efficiently. And then one last thing is, um, I, I mean, if you come across a thing that you don't know how to teach, okay, one of the things that I add as value is, I mean, very few people know enough about, like, for example, advanced biology or advanced chemistry, and you can't teach what you don't know. However, I do own a t-shirt that says YouTube certified mechanic because you can watch YouTube videos. You have an incredible um, menu of people who are teaching, and you can vet this for a political agenda. At least in chemistry, if anybody needs something, just reach out to me. There are several great venues for that discipline that have no political bias. They're incredibly well done, and there's resources that support it so you can practice what you've learned. Chad's Prep would be a great example of that. There's a guy in Arizona State University, Chad McAllister, and I've worked with him, and his website is worth every penny if you want to learn any of the high sciences. And so that'd be a great resource for homeschool parents.
Yeah, and with that, as someone wrote, you have the freedom to challenge your child as well as the pursuits. You can do school how you want, and you have a lot of options. You can do virtual. You can learn a different kind of curriculum than just from books. And she wrote also, you don't have to try to imitate the school day with the curriculum, test, a narrow desk. You can try board games, learn a language, shadow a tradesman, study for a CDL, electrician's license, all because you can do those things. But as my uh, but as one parent said who homeschools said, you can take your kids out, you know, go to the doctors, go to the dentist. You can take them shopping with you. You can have them do the shopping because that can be part of their curriculum. But then they said the key is you're going to have boomers looking at you of why are your kids not in school. You just have to get used to that. But Ann, if you want to touch on that and the efficiency of time.
Well, that and maybe I can bleed into our last question too, just
Yep.
because I've got to be efficient with my time. Plus,
Yep.
there's you mentioned the weird looks, and like I said, you don't want to. We got to get over the stigmatism of this if we have a different view on it. No, homeschooling is not a silver bullet. I mean, you could still have problems in your family, and you could still have problems in your kids' lives because sin afflicts us all, no matter what our educational methodology, whichever one we choose. Josh, you mentioned buffer equations, and that little spinny wheel appeared in my head. My mind was buffering. Um, but what it made me think of is that, what I appreciate about you and your context is that it can be done well. It can be done really well if you go to a Lutheran
I got
school.
some right here, actually. There it is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
that's
and let's also be honest, like on the counterpoint that as the kids say, the public schools are sus, you know. So we gotta entertain some of these stigmas about homeschooling. I've heard people say, parents aren't qualified to be teachers. That's bogus on its face. I've I sense, although people wouldn't realize they're doing this, that there is a guarded institutionalism here. Like, hey, if we
mhm.
promote and encourage homeschooling, what's that going to do to our our Lutheran elementary school enrollment? And to that, I would go to what Jesus said in Mark 9. I know it's not maybe a perfect application, but they said to Jesus, "We saw a man driving out demons in your name, and we told him to stop because he's not one of us." And Jesus said, "Let it be. Don't stop him. No one who does a miracle in my name can in the next moment say anything bad about me. I tell you the truth. Anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to Christ will certainly not lose his reward. Whoever is not against us is for us." You can be a homeschooler and still be a vigilant, vocal supporter of Lutheran education. And you can also be an encourager to parents who chose to put their kids into public schools. Just encourage them to be spiritually vigilant and to be incredibly discerning with those sus curriculum materials that they're bringing home. I've also heard, well, Daniel was, excuse me, Moses was educated in Egypt and Daniel was educated in Babylon, and that's very, very true. We are in the midst of a Babylon of sorts, aren't we? But it wasn't willfully. They were not there because they chose, like they had an assortment, a menu of options, and they said, you know what, I'm going to go to the Babylons. I'm going to go to the Babylonians for my academic upbringing here. We are living really in a paradise of freedom of options for our education. And so if homeschooling can be a viable one for you, don't rule it out just because of the wrong-headed stigmas that have, been projected upon it. Instead, make some good choices. Josh mentioned a couple good choices. I need to mention one that's from the Missouri Synod. Now, we don't use them, but I'm on their email list and I see a lot of the good stuff they do. But the Wittenberg Academy does a lot of good stuff. So you could check them out as well. And there's myriad others. But just know that you'll be supported by these plethora of options out there from which you can pick and choose as it suits your family.
Right. And so what we're talking about here, and Josh, you can close up with this last thing, is we're, is that a competition then between homeschooling and WELS schools? I would say no, it's not. Again, for us, Shelly and I would have loved to keep homeschooling, but for us, we also understood that it probably would not look good for us if the pastor didn't send his kids to our Lutheran elementary school. If I was just a regular member, then we may have kept uh, homeschooling and so forth. But when I moved to Racine, I learned that a previous pastor had not put his children into our Lutheran elementary school or even our Lutheran high school. And so some members still talked about that decades later. Okay. And so we don't want to have these kinds of divisions. It's not a competition. It's what is best for your family, what is best for your children. So, Josh, if you want to talk about that, since you brought up so many times how many that you have students at Wisco who were
Mhm.
homeschooled. So that means, and there's lots of opportunities for Lutheran elementary schools in your area.
Yeah, so I mean, I've also served in congregations where, at the grade school level, the parents who were homeschooling their kids would then have their daughters on the volleyball team or their boys on the basketball team. And so they had friends, they had that social component, but the mother in that case really felt a strong calling to homeschool. And in the particular example I'm thinking of, she's the best teacher I've ever seen. I mean, like, I would love to have my kids in her homeschool co-op. She's fantastic. And so there's certainly cooperation, or you homeschool your kids through grade school, and then you send your kids to your local Christian high school like Wisco or Kettle or wherever. And then you have that collaboration component there. So yeah, it's not a competition at all.
Yeah.
Well,
And
and
you want to
Mike,
touch on?
yeah, well, I'd say even if it is a competition, whoever is not against us is for us. And I mean, we do have to touch on one of the negatives here too, that there's a really good presentation out there. It's meant mainly for the college level, but Christian Price has a really good YouTube presentation called "How to Keep a Lutheran School, a Lutheran College Lutheran." And there's so many applications that can be drawn for scenarios like this. Pastors are often asked, is it appropriate for me to have non-Christian friends? And what do we say? 100%. We want to be salt and light to the world. However, come out from them and be separate, Jesus says. So it's at the juncture where your non-Christian friends begin to negatively influence your faith that the nature of the relationship or the friendship needs to change. It's sort of amazing how badly we fail to apply that to the education of our children. Our kids, don't be mistaken, will be just as much influenced by the secularism, the secular humanism, the Marxism that exists in public schools as those other kids will be influenced by our kids letting their light shine. You cannot be naive to that. Moreover, that can happen even in Lutheran schools too. So that doesn't mean you should rule these things out. It just means you need to have your eyes open. Just need to have your eyes open. And the vigilance that is needed here, no matter what choice of schooling is yours, is the spiritual priority for the spiritual well-being of your children.
Andy, I know you got to go. For the people who are looking for resources on this, this book, Serpents in the Classroom, is a fantastic resource. Is this backwards on your camera?
No, no, you're
Okay,
good.
perfect. All right. The other one that's really worth reading if you're considering homeschooling or just want to know more about education at the public sector in general is The Marxification of Education by James Lindsay. This really does a good job. And if you're looking for citations, this has hundreds of citations. And so you can go as far down the rabbit hole as you want to go with that.
Fantastic. So just wrapping up a couple of things with some other points is uh, I've heard this too of sending our students into a public school setting is, oh, they need to be evangelists. Well, that's true, except that many of us are not evangelists as adults. Why would we send our kids into a setting that we're uncomfortable of sharing our faith and now we're expecting them to do so? Uh, you mentioned Christian Voice. So we're recording this on Saturday morning. Sunday afternoon, I'm going out for beers with Christian Voice. So he is one of the Missouri Synod pastors here in town because when I was in Racine, you know, we had WELS pastors all over the place. The closest WELS pastor to me is 100 miles away, so I'm going to learn to hang out with some of the Missouri Synod brothers and sisters here. And with that, as we're talking about homeschooling again, it's not a competition with our Lutheran elementary schools. Lord willing, if you homeschool and then you send them to an area Lutheran high school like Wisco, you mentioned my alma mater, Kettle Moraine Lutheran High School, and then beyond that, to go on to Wisconsin Lutheran College, where my daughter is, or here in my backyard, downtown Casper, Luther Classical College. Those are excellent colleges that are going to continue not just a general generic Christianity, but specific Lutheran doctrine applied to everyday life that's not going on to Martin Luther College to be a pastor or a teacher. Then one last thing I mentioned I was to someone I was going to bring this up for those who are listening who are in churches that have Lutheran elementary schools that maybe they are on the school board is if you have, it's probably going to be a mom that had homeschooled her children for a number of years. Maybe she was trained at WLC or MLC to be a teacher and then decided, hey, she's going to homeschool her children. And now she wants to get back into teaching. My encouragement would be, check with your district president if this is correct, and I think it is go ahead and pay them for those years of service that they were teaching their children at home. I bring this up because this was something that I know of that one school board that did not want to pay the female teacher that they had called for those years of service, and it caused a lot of hardship. Well, she was educating her children along the way. And I think our church body is starting to figure out, hey, if we're going to get a second career teacher because we need them, or we're going to get second career pastors because we need them too, let's pay them for those years of service because they may not have been in public ministry, but they were involved in learning a lot of things outside of the realm and that they can bring into their teaching and preaching ministries. So the last thing my neighbor summarizes it very well. Put God at the center because at the end of the day, he'll always be more important than any ABC or 1, 2, 3. And she homeschools her 5 kids back in Mount Pleasant. And that reminded me of the Bible verse that is our epistle lesson for Transfiguration Sunday from 2 Peter 1, verse 19. Peter writes, we also have the completely reliable prophetic word. You do well to pay attention to it as to a lamp shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. So whatever you do, public school, Lutheran elementary school, homeschool, just use God's word, catechize your children. That is your responsibility as parents. Lord's blessings until we see you next week.